In week 7 we had a look at multiplication by shifting, and in that video I used a small subroutine to help me with printing. Now, when I did that, I made some mistakes with the subroutine conventions that I didn't follow. So it might be useful for you to go back to that video and see what those issues were before I go over them here. However, this is the code that I wrote. This is to get the multiplication of a number by 252. And this is the shift print helper that I used to print out different values, strings, to make the values presentable, because printing in MIPS is quite difficult. You have to print new lines constantly, you need to do it manually, and you need to print the strings by loading them into A0 and then getting the right call value. So there's a lot of work to do just to print stuff out, so it makes sense we'd want to automate that. Now this does that for me. Now, there's nothing wrong with this subroutine itself. It doesn't do anything wrong. It uses registers A0, A1, T1 and V0. So these are all registers that it's allowed to freely manipulate, and once it's done it uses jump register to jump back to the return address. So everything is fine on this side. However, if we go back here, you'll notice that when I did my addition to add the shifting multiplications onto the total, I stored them in A0. So I just assumed that A0 would not be manipulated and that it would be maintained by the subroutine. Now, this is a bad idea, mainly because the subroutine has absolutely no responsibility to save this value. Now, because of the way I wrote this code, I was lucky in that I didn't delete that value. I moved A0 into T1 and then moved it back when I needed it. Now, this doesn't cause any problems with this code, but what I should do, if I'm going to do this properly, is instead of storing this value in A0, I should store it in something like S1. And this value should also be in S1. Now, you might think that this is an issue that I've stored this in A1, but I don't actually need to save this value after I've done the addition, and before I call my subroutine, it's been used. Then, it gets fed to the subroutine as one of the function arguments, so it's fine for this value to stay in A1. However, if I've changed this, now that it's in S1, this shift print helper will not know where it is because it prints out value in A0 and A1. So we're going to have to do some modifications here. So what I should do is I should move to A0 the value in S1. Now this will move the total into a register that the shift print helper can use and will not affect the total. Similarly, I'll have to do this down here. So this should be S1 now, and this should be S1. Again, I don't need to change this because it's fine for this to be overwritten. I don't need to keep that value. It just needs to be given to the print helper, and then that's it done. Similarly, here I'll need to do this again. Now, there's also something wrong with this code. I changed this since the last time we saw it because I wanted to show you this going wrong in practice, but you'll notice I have include shift printer helper here. Now, that just copies the code from that file into this file. Now, I keep the subroutine in a different file to help with reusability so that I can just go and get that file and include it in any file I want, or any code I want, just to print. Now, if I run this, you'll notice something weird happens, which is we loop infinitely. So we took away 8, and then we add 8, and then we add 8, and then we add 8, and we add 8. Now, there's only 4 lines of, or about 6 lines of code in the file, so we shouldn't be looping infinitely. Let's see why that is. Well, if we go back to this code is just included here. Now what will happen is we'll finish this print help 1, and then we'll go down to this one, and it will just have this file's code here. And every time it gets to the bottom of this print help 1, it will jump to the return address. Now, because the jump and link instruction was used here, the return address will be set to the program counter in memory just after this. So we set to this address plus 4. So we'll always keep jumping to the top here, or just above the shift print helper.asm, and we'll keep looping infinitely. So what I need to do to avoid this is to load a media into V0, 10, and do a syscall. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this if you know that your subroutine is going to cancel properly and it doesn't matter how this happens. That's what happens with the your testing files and the labs. But this is a good way to make sure that you don't get stuck in an infinite loop like that, is to always include the syscall and the load immediate v10. If I run this now, we'll get the same code that we got out from the example in the video. So we added 512, that makes the current total 512. We took away 8, that makes the current total 504. And this is how we would fix some of the issues that this has. Now, these were, luckily enough, didn't cause me any problems because of the way I set up the shift-print helper. So it was good enough to use for that example. However, I did violate some of the calling conventions, which could have wound up with me trashing some of the registers. Now what that means is, because the subroutine has absolutely no responsibility to save what's in A0, I could have quite easily called a subroutine that would have overwritten the total, making my code useless. This is why you need to be very careful about following the MIPS calling conventions, and why you have to be careful about including files like this in your code. Now that's everything for today. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Thanks.